calls for change are getting louder. Religious groups, community organisations, even mayors and presidents have called the name used by the American football team in Washington racist, offensive and outdated. But the team says it has no plans to change.
I don't think they can understand the pain it causes us, the feelings that we have when someone uses that term. I think understanding the historical nature of that term and what it meant is probably the closest they can try and get, but I would hope they could try and understand.
The name came from bounties placed on Native Americans in the 1800s. Money would only be paid out for the bloodied skins of dead men, women and children.
No justice, no peace.
Protests across the country in the wake of George Floyd's killing have prompted many companies into a rethink of names, brands and imagery. Sports organisations issued statements of support but have been slow to follow words with actions. Speaking on a sports radio show this week, the team's new head coach, Ron Rivera, said he wasn't pushing the issue, adding, "I think that's a discussion for another time. I think it's all about the moment and the timing." This is the stadium where the football team in Washington used to play its games. There was a statue to the man who brought the team to the city, but they pulled it down. He was a segregationist, a man who refused to integrate black players into his team until the last possible moment. And critics say by refusing to change the name, the team is once again on the wrong side of history.
They're willing to say that racism against Native Americans is okay. And that's literally the conversation that we're having right now. And it's really about the Washington team, it's about the league, sort of cherry picking what kinds of racism they're gonna stand against. And in sort of riding the wave of the moment, but when they are, endorsing this racist name and these racist symbols.
The team had a Twitter blackout recently in support of the ongoing protests. The owner insists he's not changing the name. Never is the word he's used in the past.
We, the National Football League, condemn racism.
The National Football League has acknowledged there's change in the air, and never might come sooner than he thinks. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Pleased to have Ross Griffin with us now, an assistant professor at QATAR University here in Doha, whose work focuses on the relationship between sport and culture. Thank you for sticking around with us. Couldn't talk to you last hour, unfortunately. So on the issue of the Redskins specifically, if not now, when? I mean, look at the movement at the moment. You've got outdated caricatures on pancake syrup and rice products being changed. And this one issue which keeps coming up of the Redskins, they won't move.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's probably the most potent example of acceptable racism, it seems, in America at the moment. NFL teams and the Redskins, obviously, they're a unique case in sport in that the teams are very much owned privately by the guys in charge, like Dan Snyder, who has said, "This is mine, I'm not going to change it." The Redskins name to him is something more than just a name, it's a badge of identity. So he is very adamant, as your reporter just said there, that it's never going to change. To answer your question, if not now, when? That's a big question. He would have to be leaned upon, I think, by a number of parties, including the NFL and the other owners, to make that change. And until the NFL actually say to him, "We think now is the time," and the majority of the rest of the owners in that league say, "Okay, let's make positive change," I really can't see it happening in the short term.
And yet, when you actually look at the sporting landscape in the United States, a majority, certainly of sportsmen, and I suspect sportswomen as well, are non-white themselves. You look at the basketball players and football players, obviously there shouldn't be signs of racism, but you've got actually a majority of non-white sportsmen and women there.
Yeah, well, this is it. If you want to take the NFL as an example, less than 30% of the players are actually white. But there's a massive discrepancy when you go into the management and the coaching area of the game, whereas less than 10% or approximately 10% of the head coaches in the NFL are either African-American or Latino. So you have this big, I suppose, discrepancy between the playing staff and the coaching staff that must be overcome. And it's something that the NFL has been heavily criticized for over the last 10, 15 years or so, and it led to the implementation in 2003 of the Rooney Rule, which insisted that you must have at least one candidate from an ethnic minority interviewed for a head coaching position or an executive position. But this rule has been taken or abused by many teams who have often just interviewed a token candidate to check a box.
Ross Griffin, I'm glad we could talk to you about this issue. Thanks for taking the time today.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.